All right, so welcome to this December 2022 edition of Trends in AI. And with me on as an interview guest today is no other than Nathan Benaich. And as we're kind of closing off the year, we couldn't have wished for a better guest because you are not only known as the general partner at Air Street Capital, where you're one of the smart investors in AI, but mainly everybody knows you as the founder and co-author of the State of AI report, which we're going to talk about in a bit. You brought the report out in October. I'm really curious now in December how you look at your predictions and what other things you see emerging. So welcome on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. Look forward to the discussion.
So before we talk about the State of AI report, I read that you studied biology, and I'm really curious if you could tell us a little bit about your journey, how you went from biology to AI to investments to being one of the most influential analysts of the space.
I went to biology because I'm definitely a science person, like a science and technology person. I like working on these kinds of problems that are kind of technical, but where if you get it right or you solve something, then it's relevant for a very, very large problem space, or like body of people. And when I started undergrad, it was in 2006 when there was tons of excitement around stem cell biology and regenerative medicine, and cellular reprogramming a bit after that. And I mean, there's probably arguably like no other as exciting space than like controlling biology in a very like predictive fashion or controllable fashion. So I went to undergrad studying mostly biology, math, and chemistry. I was pre-med. I was on the kind of psycho train of doing an MD PhD at some point. And after doing a bunch of research in my undergrad, which started to kind of use bioinformatics as a way to understand large-scale genomics and other kinds of biological data sets. I did grad school in the UK and let go of the ambition to become a physician scientist, and spent 3 years in my PhD from 2010 to 2013. Again, kind of integrating experimental data sets on genomics and expression of various genes in cancer patients who had metastatic spread, which is basically cells that kind of leave the primary tumor and move around the body. And I was studying what genes might be responsible for that, and also undertaking, wet lab biological experiments and trying to integrate the two together. And eventually in 2013, when I submitted, I grew sufficiently interested in this process of working on, kind of technical problems with new kinds of tools like machine learning and bioinformatics, and how one might be able to take those kinds of technologies and form companies out of them. And so I felt that moving into the VC world would kind of get me closer to understanding how that process worked. And yeah, a couple years later, I'm still here, and then realized there's a lot of stuff to solve and innovate for in the venture product for founders that are working in machine learning, and that's been the main focus of my career in the last few years.
Right. So you kind of understood that there's a universal algorithm maybe that can be used across many domains and create value for you as an investor.
Yeah. I mean, I think, at a high level, what's most exciting about machine learning is like every product in the world that has been created is a product of intelligence of some form. And, that mission of, learning how to recreate forms of intelligence and make use of that for real world problems, I think is like the most exciting thing to work on. And then secondarily, machine learning is almost like a lever on tech progress across everywhere that tech exists. And so it is also an investment theme that keeps on giving as a function of the sort of substrates in which it's applied being right for that application. And so we see some domains come online, in the last decade, and others that are coming on this decade, and we'll see new ones in the future as well. So it has persistence in that sense too.
What's your track record? What are you guys doing with Air Street Capital, and how have you guys kind of been lucky or not so much with AI so far?
Yeah, I mean, I started making investments in AI-based software companies in 2014 or so, and one of the early outcomes there was a business called Napillary, which was doing crowdsourced computer vision, basically building an open version of Google Street Maps, Street View, that we eventually sold to Facebook to power their mapping business. We also had one of the early generative AI companies for music called JukeDeck, which was sold to ByteDance, and it was integrated in TikTok. Then kind of moved more into fintech with a business called Thought Machine, which does data analytics and data infrastructure for cloud banking, which is worth like 3 billion now and powers a lot of the JP Morgan consumer accounts. Moved back into Vision with Tractable, doing car insurance damage inspection and repair. They now power a lot of the claims that process through Geico in the US when individuals break their car, need to get it fixed. And then like more recently with Airstreet, I've been diving a lot into tech bio as a sort of reframing of biotech, where the main difference is that founders come not from a pure biology background, but from a software engineering background, and kind of look very religiously at the drug discovery value chain as an example, and sort of ask how can we bring technology to bear. So I made a number of investments there, including Allsight, which was a Viennese cancer drug personalization company that we sold to Exscientia pre-IPO. So now we're holders in Exscientia as a public company, and a number of earlier companies like Intensai, which does health and safety, computer vision in manufacturing industrial environments, and V7, which is more of an infrastructure play to help businesses and developers build and manage training data.
So you have quite a well-connected and large portfolio of investments in that space. So most people really know you as the initiator or author of State of AI. So how did you guys as a VC fund kind of stumble into that? How did you guys get started on that, and what made you do that?
Yeah, I mean, it actually originated through, a number of meetings that I had with, former entrepreneur Ian Hogarth, who is, since a prolific angel investor, in particular in machine learning companies and other software companies, and now started his own investment platform. And, we met 5 or so years ago, and we'd sort of both been keeping track and working tangentially or directly in machine learning based companies. He was particularly interested in geopolitics, the emerging geopolitics of AI, and wrote a really influential essay called AI Nationalism pretty soon thereafter. And I guess as like a PhD person, I just like diving into research papers, which is why you and I hang out. And also been investing in companies, and we kind of felt like we sort of assembled together like a diverse set of interests, which represented more broadly the various players that are involved in AI. And we're both fans of Mary Meeker's State of Internet report, which we would consume on an annual basis to really get a temperature check and kind of yardstick on what's up, basically in internet.
Is she still doing that?
No, she stopped. Yeah, which is a bit of a shame.
I think she had even more pages than you do.
Oh yeah. That was
her slide decks
and it was
very well known for the number of slides.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, and we felt that AI is like super exciting, lots of things happening, but lots of noise. Very broad, very big diversity of people need to know about this subject, and there wasn't a canonical kind of open source document that explained the most important concepts from an editorialized take, but one that spoke to diverse audiences, so it would be credible landing on the desk of somebody at OpenAI or DeepMind, but also credible landing on the desk of a politician or a growth stage technology company or a corporate. And so we ideated this idea, started hacking on a Google Doc, and put down a bunch of content that we thought was interesting, drawing on various resources, including this newsletter that I continue to write for 5 or 6 years now, called Guide to AI, on a monthly basis. And just kind of jumped into making slides and wanted to not make it super polished so it looks like a pro marketing thing, because it's definitely not. It's still like
is it a work of love, or does it have some value for your, let's say, investment practice?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like a work of love, I would say. It's like really like one of the side hobbies that I have, including a spin out FYI, which is like a separate project around commercialization of academic research. But yeah, it just helps organize thoughts and also I feel like play a part in the community that I learned a lot from. I stylize a lot of what I do as trying to be, a core contributor to this like overall project of AI that various people are working on in different ways. And while I'm not publishing papers or committing code to projects, like I want to feel like I'm making a contribution to the development of the space. And then there's some peripheral benefits from it, like doing this on repeat for 5 years, that it seems like maybe this last edition of the report, we've really gone like quite broad recognition for it. But yeah, it's definitely been a labor of love for many years, and always looking to improve it. And it's a great way to have just like an honest and like level-headed conversation with peers in a way that projects that we genuinely care about this space and we're not finance people cutting checks.
Right. So yeah, it's truly been recognized as a very valuable labor of love. So there's hardly anybody I speak to who hasn't actually read it. And indeed, it lands on the desks of individual researchers, but also of decision makers, politicians, CEOs in companies that know very little about it. So actually kind of like what's in it is not only a very good reflection of the space, but it's also quite influential. So can you tell us a bit, like it's grown from a hobby a bit to more of a side project with a more serious note? How do you guys make it? What's the process for compiling the report? And
yeah, it's pretty much an ongoing rise of, on a daily basis through, reading stuff that surfaces through, our inbox, through Twitter, through conversation with people in the community, just keeping track of these kind of major links and ideas that I generally package on a monthly basis in the form of a newsletter. The monthly basis is helpful for after 4 weeks saying kind of, yes, that was really cool, or no, that was actually false signal, actually in the context of things kind of meh. And so I curate that on a monthly basis. And then come the start of the summer, sort of June, July, we start to whip out a sketch document on Google where we just put some of the major things that happened across the key areas that we want to focus on, which has traditionally been research, industry.
These like different pillars, right? Like talent.
Exactly. Yeah. Geopolitics. We've done talent. We kind of removed it as a separate section and merged it where we felt it was better placed. And in one of the years we did a China section, and this year we did a safety section to really kind of represent the growing interest of safety and alignment research, because there were some pretty cool papers that came out on this topic. And then we make a set of predictions every year to partially like keep the report spicy, partially to like push ourselves to figure out where things might go. And then we provide a rating of our performance on an annual basis with the citations.
You're doing pretty good so far.
Yeah. It's been cool. It's tough.
So what's kind of your criterion? So given the influence that you have with the report, how do you kind of, what's your sounding board of what is interesting and what is maybe just like a personal whim?
So it's editorial. So we don't promise to cover like absolutely everything. We definitely start with more slides than what we publish, probably cut down, and especially so in research because it moves so fast and there's so many ways of slicing the same concept and exciting papers that come out. So that section we usually cut at 30 to 50% every year. We tried to keep it to overall 100 slides this year, and there was a little bit of extension over that. So in general, it's what we think is most interesting, which is also influenced by what gets the most attention and what gets discussed at major conferences or amongst peers or on Twitter. And then, we'll make all the slides, and then we'll have a kind of reviewer consortium or group of people who, we think reflect folks that are real builders and influencers in a good sense of the space, that come from industry or startups or academia. And the goal there is to get them to call out like glaring gaps or, unintended misrepresentations or unintended mistakes, or just like kind of critiquing our interpretation of things to make sure that we present something that is like factually accurate and fair. We do still take a stance where if, certain people have an issue with our interpretation, but we feel that it is genuinely correct, then we keep it. We're not gonna, this is not like a corporate influence document. So in years past, we have ruffled feathers with our take of what is factually true. But I think that's like an important part of like creating a healthy discussion.
Yeah.
And then maybe the last bit is like we do really like data-driven insights, for lack of a better way of framing things, because there are some sort of like unsaid truths or like just things that people know in the community that they have a hunch for because of conversations and what they experience in the day-to-day, but there's no like canonical source of truth that says that factually this is the case. And that was some of the work that we did with you guys at Zeta Alpha on the compute usage. And that was extremely popular because everybody feels, we can get into what that was specifically, but everybody felt one way, but nobody had numbers to prove it. And this was like the first time we could actually show people like, hey, the numbers are there.
You know that I'm a really big fan of mining the literature and mining
Indeed.
sort of unstructured content for insights and kind of distilling these trends and important insights from the data. So if you fast forward for like 3 years, 5 years, and you extrapolate a little bit the progress in models and kind of the ability of AI models to digest very large amounts of unstructured data, what parts of the report do you think can be automated, and what parts are essentially your own human judgment?
I think anything that provides a synopsis of the key findings, well, that like the setup of the experiment and why it's interesting, the experiments themselves, and then the key findings, that could probably be automated. So in that regard, like a lot of the research slides where we try and explain to people the significance of certain work, I'd imagine that we could use LMs for that, and then maybe take a more editorial view as to the influence of it. Because if LMs are kind of a representation of like the entire internet, then I sort of wonder to some degree if they basically just represent the average less, and sometimes they're confidently correct and confidently not correct. And so sort of interpretation layer we would probably want to keep. And then, potentially if like LMs can create figures from raw data, then that would probably be nice too, which is like generate me a chart, etc., with these features from this raw data. Predictions, I don't know, that would probably be a bit tricky. And then the politics stuff would probably be censored, I guess, by most LLM vendors,
Exactly.
unless we use a fully open source version.
Well, there's some hope for that with the new collectives forming some of these open source alternatives. So, well, what can be automated will be automated. Let's leave it at that. So everybody should check it out. By the way, the URL is here. State of AI. It's really worth reading from front to back. So thanks for producing this valuable resource for the community. The center point of it every year, I think, are your predictions, where you make things really measurable. So now that you're at the end of the year and we've seen things like a launch of ChatGPT, I think has kind of had a very seismic impact in both the AI research community. I was at NeurIPS and nobody was talking about anything else, but also in the broader public, right? It's reached the general press in like a few days, and my children and my neighbors are playing with it. So things move very fast. What are some things that now, like 2 months after publication of the report, are some trends that you didn't see back in September, October?
Well, I guess like we didn't per se like publish a predict a model like ChatGPT. I think what's kind of interesting there is like the resurgence of reinforcement learning, which has kind of been very exciting as a path towards AGI, in like 2015, 16, 17, and then has seemingly gone out of favor for a while and now seems to come back with a bit of a vengeance as a way of aligning models with human preferences and with certain like behaviors that we want. I think this like prediction number 5 about big companies investing billions of dollars into AGI companies, I think is literally happening like right now. We haven't seen this like regulation for AGI lab regulation from a biosafety point of view yet, but like the real motivation for that is that in bio, if you do experiments with viruses or certain potentially dangerous materials that can modify DNA and things like this, you have to provide for protocols and safety measures and work in a specific facility and log every interaction in a way that you don't actually have to do if you do anything with your computer. We think it's not unlikely that certain politicians would take an issue with that and seek to regulate certain AI systems in the same way that we would do with AGI.
That politicians would actually regulate the labs themselves, not so much the product, because obviously, like the European,
I think the type of workflow
very focused on the product and the liability around the product, right?
Yeah, I think it would probably be around like the specific kind of work, which is where it becomes a bit tricky. Like, where do you draw the line? I don't know, because regulating an entire organization, that some of which might be doing work that qualifies to be regulated and much of which won't, is quite a blunt instrument. We also definitely think that like NVIDIA will make a strategic move with a large sort of foundation model style company. There's many of these players that are out fundraising at the moment, so imagine this will shake out in the next couple of months too. Similarly, like the prediction around semiconductor,
there's a few of them which lost their major investor as well.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. So that maybe makes the prediction 8, the 100 million invested in AI alignment, a bit more tricky because the guy with all the money doesn't have it anymore. I still think there's going to be some news around AI semiconductor companies struggling a bit, and we have a separate slide also in the report that looks at the historical analogy in the US in the 60s when the government had use for integrated circuits and bought all of them that were on the market. And that's like a way of demonstrating that governments can act as buyers of first resort for emerging technologies that might not see like large scale use in the commercial sector.
Mhm.
And I think a similar mentality should actually apply to many of these AI startups that do semiconductors, because the market there is at this point still early. It's been like 5-ish years, and it's still hard to point to a dedicated type of machine learning work that wasn't enabled previously because of these new architectures that are published. And so, at the same time, we still agree that from a industry concentration, from a tech sovereignty point of view, we do need more vendors, and certainly more vendors that are local, to an ecosystem. And so I think the governments do have a role to play to step in and say, look, we'll fund these companies, we'll sort of bridge this gap, and we'll buy their
Mhm.
product, not just invest in their company, but we'll buy their products, we'll set up data centers and national supercomputing centers, which we also provided for in the report as a slide. And a lot of European countries just don't have very large clusters of compute systems that are relevant for deep learning versus many American supercomputer systems in national labs and private companies.
Yeah, and I saw
So
that you launched this new sort of side project of the report to track actually a kind of day by day the compute capacity for
yeah,
training, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, compute capacity, and also some new stuff with you guys around the use of certain chipsets in AI papers, because I think that's just a very good litmus test for where this space is moving in the commercial sector. Because as we know, like most of the experimentation occurs in the research context. So if we don't see a signal in research context, I think it translates a bunch into real world demand.
Yeah, we spoke at NeurIPS with one of the people from Cerebras, and they had actually some very good news because Jasper AI partnered
I
with them.
know.
And I think that was a big deal for Cerebras and maybe
Yeah.
also Jasper AI. And so for me, like and I think you're also very bullish about generative AI models, right? I saw on your LinkedIn profile that you call yourself a generative AI investor.
Yeah, it's tongue in cheek.
Tongue in cheek. Okay. Well, I think the drop of ChatGPT certainly meant that generative language models are a lot further than
Totally,
people thought, a lot sooner.
totally, totally.
And so
Yeah,
I'm curious where you see this developing. So if you had to force choose, like OpenAI monopoly or any flowers to bloom?
I think in the like large model space, I think you can paint a credible path at the moment that OpenAI is like heading towards a monopoly in model capabilities, because depending on how many tweaks and how much RLHF they had to do for their model and any kind of intricacies with the design of it and the data set, depending how complicated that was, the lead can actually be quite large versus what we have in open source and other companies have. And there's probably some form of limit at which companies that want to make use of this technology no longer think that it's useful for them to compete and build their own equally large models. And so they'll just consume whatever OpenAI produces. That's like one case. I mean, I oftentimes think that these like large models are going to make it even better for prototyping and testing ideas and just rapidly iterating towards finding product market fit. And
Mhm.
then once you get there and you start building some market share, then that's when you start looking at your unit economics and your dependency on third-party providers, and the
This is
balance
more or
of
less what
pros and
Jasper
cons.
AI is now doing, right? Kind of trying to hedge their bets with OpenAI and trying to
Yeah, exactly. I think, yeah, I mean, it's fairly obvious, like reading between the lines, what they're doing. The CEO tweeted back when I raised that point, saying they're perfectly happy with OpenAI, but some of their customers have certain needs, which I thought was just kind of a funny interaction. But yeah, like I think that demonstrates the path, because at some point they'll realize like certain workloads they could probably just solve for themselves and maybe don't need some ginormous model that's very slow and expensive to run. And then that'll improve their economics and just make themselves more compelling as like a long-term vendor. But I still think as models get better and better, like it just makes the sort of UI and UX like wrapping of a model even more important, because customers like have little time, they have little patience, they just want something that works. You can sort of see this a little bit with like even in translation, you've got Microsoft, like Apple, all the big guys have translation solutions, but if you instead like provide good APIs that allow you to integrate translation into a workflow product, it's likely that you'll end up making good amounts of money, that because the UX is a lot easier, you don't have to go copy paste things and move things around, and it's more native. Yeah. So that's why a business like DeepL can thrive at their scale. So
in terms of like you as an investor, you're more bullish about AI companies which are closer to the end user rather than the ones that are closer to the sort of technology stack.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the ways I put this is I think exposing a model's capabilities via API doesn't allow the API owner to maximally capture value that it helps its customer create. So if you contrast like a generative model, which is like quite powerful in its output and can be used in so many different ways, like generating trading predictions, and so if you make good trades, then you make a ton of money, versus like generating copy for a blog post.
Yeah.
It seems bizarre that an API provider would charge the same amount of money to those two profiles. And you compare that with, for example, a more like a non-generative machine learning API, like, I don't know, Twilio or something that sends out text messages. Like the value of a text message is as much to you with your users than to Google. It's just that Google pays way more because they have more users. But it's not like you've invented some way to magically monetize like text messages that can create like
talking about Google, that's one of the biggest mysteries to me. So Google has to be employing the largest sort of share of talent of the entire tech ecosystem in AI research, right? So why are not, it's not one of your predictions, but it's one of the things that's puzzling me the most. Like, why are they not productizing these services around Palm or Lambda or what have you?
I think the answer is just it's just a large organization. Some parts of it are slow moving, potentially sclerotic, where liability and risk is a higher priority than capturing a little bit of market share and attention versus an ads business. So, the risk of exposing something like what Meta does with Blender and Galactica and the whole backlash that happens through mismanagement of these releases is more painful to them than potentially making 10 million or 50 million or even, God forbid, 50 million on it. And so, it's sort of like you suffer from that at scale, and you suffer from many teams working on the same thing with not a clear and concise product roadmap that operates like a startup, which is basically the management style of OpenAI. And you become more reactionary and focused on large scale revenue opportunities.
I think they're the only ones who can protect us from OpenAI / Microsoft. If you look at your prediction number 5, I think OpenAI is Microsoft.
Yeah.
So I think Google is the only one who can change anything in that. But I think they might be asleep. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So
I mean, there's certainly people there that are not asleep at the wheel, but it's just do they get the voice?
Right. So coming back to next year, 2023, what is one of the 9 predictions or one of the predictions that you didn't think of at the time that you feel sort of strongest about, that you think is going to have the biggest impact? Not the highest likelihood of coming through, but going to have the biggest impact.
If there's like genuinely a way to monetize fully open source AI, like what Stability is doing, what Hugging Face is doing, and like these companies can demonstrate that they can become Databricks style companies, then I think we're in a really good place. I think that's what like a lot of folks are looking for or hoping for.
That's what a lot of folks are rooting for.
Yeah,
right.
and rooting for, exactly.
Okay. Well, I think our time is up. So thanks for joining us. I really enjoyed also working with you with the Zeta Alpha data set. So for those folks who don't know Zeta Alpha, check out our platform. It's a really handy and smart way to discover and organize knowledge once you've read sort of the big picture in the State of the AI report. Thanks, Nathan, for joining us. And
Thanks
have
so
a great
much.
day.
Thanks.